Good evening and welcome to the February 10th, 2022 meeting of the Needham Board of Health. I'm Rob Partridge, Chair. This open meeting of the Board of Health is being conducted in person and remotely per the Governor's Executive Order of 3/12/2020 and as amended on June 15th, 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The materials for this meeting have been circulated previously and are available on the town website. This meeting is being recorded. I will introduce each board member by name. Please respond by saying yes when your name is called. Christina Matthews.
Yes.
Steve Epstein.
Yes.
Ed Cosgrove.
Yes. Can you turn on? It says the host has to do it.
Sorry, the host has to do.
Has to do what we heard you to Ed, but we didn't hear what the host has to do.
Turn on the video so you can see me.
Video capability. Okay.
That's very interesting.
You sure you can't control it, Ed?
No, I get a message says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Same for me, Kathleen.
Okay, Kathleen, while we're doing this, you are present.
Yes, I had no idea. I thought it was only Zoom. Sorry, I'd be there. Oh,
That's okay.
oh well.
Rob Partridge, yes.
So if Kathleen can give it a try, I think we changed the permission, sorry.
Okay. Kathleen, do you want to give it a try?
There we go.
Oh, there we go.
Let me try.
Oh, I did.
Where we had you. There we go.
This one is set up. So
All right. And maybe there we go.
There we go.
Okay. So the first item on the agenda is the review of the minutes from January 20th. Does anybody have any comments or amendments to the minutes?
I do, just on the, let's see, let me get down to the page where they talk about the air quality sensors, page 2, last paragraph. These are not being installed in schools. These are outdoor ambient sensors. That's kind of a big difference. We're just working with this, or we'd like to work with the schools to analyze the data. So if we can say, it was agreed that they would be installed in community locations, outdoors. Let's see, for an ongoing, I don't know that I would agree that's to raise environmental awareness, but that's fine.
Page 2, Kathleen?
Yeah, at the bottom, last paragraph.
Okay, so change that it was agreed that they would be installed, so change it to more work with the schools.
Yeah, they're not being installed in the schools. The idea was reach out to have high school students potentially help, look at the data or use it in a project or something,
They'll be outside
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah, they're ambient monitors. Yeah, they're not being inside. Yeah, we have 10 of them. It doesn't make sense to put them indoors,
Okay.
I mean, unless Diane thinks otherwise, but my understanding is they're only outdoors. They're outdoor sensors.
All right. Other changes or additions to the minutes?
No. Only question I had is in the public health nursing, second paragraph, it says, I missed that part of the meeting, so I don't know. It just says Dr. Cosgrove noted that the stats show that over 400,000 seniors received their second doses. Is that for Massachusetts? Or I just wanted to make sure that he wasn't referring to Needham.
Yeah, could be referring to Needham, but yeah, I'm
No,
not
it
sure.
doesn't.
Yeah. I'm gonna assume it would be the state. So yeah, we can add.
I think
in
it's the
with-
state. If I remember, it's the state.
Okay.
Yeah, because we've had more than 400
Yeah.
receive their second doses for sure. Okay. All right. And a motion to accept the minutes as amended.
So moved.
And
Second.
Okay, and by roll call, Kathleen,
Yes,
Yes,
Steve,
Yes.
Christina.
Do I need to abstain since I missed half of the meeting? Or,
You're not
Um,
required to. You can vote on the minutes.
Okay,
Or
yeah,
abstain if you wish.
then yes.
Okay, and Rob is yes. Okay. All right, and moving on to staff reports. And I'm not sure if Michael is here to
Yes,
do
I'll need
emergency
to
management.
promote folks to panelist.
Okay, so emergency management.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hi, Michael.
So this month or last month was a busy month with the January 29th blizzard. We convened a EOC pre-incident meeting on the Thursday where the decision was made to shut down most of the town buildings over the weekend and to postpone the COVID clinic. And that proved really useful because not very many people were on the roads at all, which was a huge boon to our DPW. The rate of snow was the biggest issue with that storm, and we did lose some roads in the late afternoon just because the snowfall rate was so quick. But everything was recovered by the end of Saturday night, and then clearing continued Sunday, and the snow was finally hauled away on Monday. We did luck out in that the snow was light and fluffy, so we had only sporadic and short-term power outages. So we didn't require a warming center. So in some regards, the blizzard was better than the wet, heavy ice storm, you know, that coupled with the fire at Harvey's made for a challenging day. So the hazard and vulnerability assessment, the contract for that has been awarded to Cole Consulting. They led our previous HVA back in 2017 as well. So we're excited to get working with them so we can update our hazard and vulnerability assessment. This is going to be partially supported using the Emergency Management Performance Grant Funds, which was a $8,500 award. I was also informed this week by MEMA that we did get our $3,000 award that we applied for with the Competitive Hazardous Materials Emergency Preparedness Grant. And so that'll be going towards a tabletop exercise for the local emergency planning committee. That'll involve the town departments, and the hospital, and any other LEPC partners that want to participate. And that'll have a hazmat focus. And then answering the Board of Health's question from the last meeting, I reached out to MEMA, and the PPE supplies are available to any municipal facility that requires them to continue operations. So that is an option that's available to the library and the CAP and Park and Rec programming. This was discussed briefly at the local emergency planning committee meeting on Monday as well. So I haven't heard requests from any of the directors of those departments to actually use the stockpile. And then the police, in addition, have a stockpile of about 6,000 KN95s as well that could be available if any town department is interested in using those as well. Are there any questions for me?
So the MEMA stockpile can be, it sounds like at the moment there's no request for it, but it could be accessed pretty quickly.
That is correct. Yeah, so currently no one's reached out from the town asking for masks, but it should be, if they do, it would be a pretty quick turnaround of a day or two.
And they are KN95s?
They are both KN95s and surgical masks are available.
Okay, great. Any questions for Michael? All right, thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Next, emergency management support, Talib.
Tom's not here, so I will give his quick report.
Okay.
He is still supporting our MRC and everything, so he's doing a lot of the vaccine clinics, especially the kid vaccine clinics. He is setting up some more MRC trainings for the next coming year. We have one next week with Brooklyn Police about active threat and situational awareness, which will be great. He's doing all our NCA MRC activation questions so that we get the FET funds from the state. And then he and I applied for a grant from Metro West Health Foundation that was awarded $50,000. And with that, we will begin COVID-19 testing. We were also able to get an Abbott ID Now machine, which hopefully will be here in 2 weeks or around that time. And we will then hire some staffing to help us run that. Decisions on how and best to do that and which scenarios we'll do and how we'll open it up still to come, but the 50,000 will be spent on staffing and supplies to hopefully set up an outdoor testing drive-through type scenario.
Oh,
That's fantastic.
Congratulations. That means we don't need to use the ARPA funds that we were going to use. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, so
And-
the 50,000 for the tests can go somewhere else for test kits, yeah.
Great. And how many kits, how many like sets do we get? We have one machine.
So Abbott requires, there's 2 ways you can get the machine is you have to rent it and commit to doing 300 tests a year. Well, so they say every 300 tests you get a machine, so you can do as many tests as you like and many machines as long as it's 300 per machine. Or you can just buy the machine and then you still have to commit to at least 100 tests, but then you can do whatever. So for the first year, we're gonna commit to renting it, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So we'll do at least 300, but with the grant, I believe it will be over probably 450 tests that we could do with the money that's left over after staffing. So somewhere
For
around
the
there.
year, for the year?
Yes, we have to spend this money by the end of February next year, I believe, 2023. So yes, we've got the money for that for at least 1 year.
What does it cost to rent this for the year?
So it's free to rent as long as you do
Oh, okay.
300 tests, but the test, each test themselves is $45. So it's came out to like $12,000 for the tests.
And they have to run the machine can run one test at a time.
Yeah, and they're
So
every
that-
12 minutes, takes about 12 minutes to get the test result. So timing and things like that, we'll have to figure out. how that
Right,
best
right.
works,
From
but
considerations and how
Yeah,
to best deploy that
yeah. So
if it's a one.
Can you do flu on those too?
we can if we want to. So we're gonna kind of take it slow at first to see. It does multiple, it does RSV, it does flu, it does COVID. And there's one I'm missing, does another one.
Mhm.
So we'll start with COVID and then see, but if we decide to keep it for next year, then yeah, I think the plan is to potentially do flu as well, so that we can do them at the same time and figure out.
Which it is. Mhm. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you for that update. Next, we have traveling meals. And it says Mary Ann as the staff member. I don't know if that's right or not.
Yeah, Marion's here.
Oh, great. Welcome back. Hi, Mary Ann.
You're muted.
Yes, we can.
You're on mute.
You just put yourself on mute, Mary Ann. We could hear you.
Is that better? Good
There you
evening.
are.
Forgive me. Any questions on the report? Because I really have nothing to add. Except I'll be retiring in a couple weeks. That's it.
All right. Congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you. It was beyond,
Hard work, yeah.
even in its worst times, it was still a pleasure to do the program. Thank you.
That's great to hear. Yeah.
And we do have, the position was posted. We have applicants, interviews were conducted this week. Tara, maybe you could give a brief update?
Yeah, so we got a pretty good set of applicants. We brought a few back, 5 back total for first round interviews virtually. We conducted those, and then we're bringing 2 back in person next week. So could be down to the final 2. We'll know on Thursday if we like one of the candidates, but we got lucky with some good candidates, so.
That's good news. Tough shoes to fill, but we will
Absolutely.
try, yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, if there are no questions for Mary Ann or Tara, we'll move on to environmental health. And I can see that Diana is here. And I don't know who, is it Diana or Tara who will be presenting?
Yeah, I could start a couple topics and if Diana want to pick up, but I had a couple of stars. One is the rice barn. I was going to give a quick update on that. As you know, we had issued them a 60-day permit. They were the other establishment that we had on watch towards the end of the year. They did show more improvement. So we were able to put their permit in on a monthly basis. So for the month of January, we issued a permit. However, that month in January, Diana, conducted and Monica conducted follow-up inspections, but we just were kind of seeing the same routine violations week after week. I think we inspected every other week they went in. And so again, we're at the point where we had to make a decision. Listen, if we keep continually seeing these repeat violations and we're not seeing improvement, we're not going to be able to issue you a full permit, to be open to the public. You have to have a safe and sanitary establishment. So we were able to revise his MOU. He had an existing MOU with us, added some more details in there as far as date marking procedures and protocols, as well as having him work with a food consultant and having additional trainings of his staff and his new staff that he had come on board, and also have some unannounced spot check inspections. So he took it upon himself to hire with his own money, his own food consultant, and we agreed to issue a 2-month permit, so a 60-day permit after that. And so we're hoping he has been working with a bilingual trainer who's a certified trainer, and they'll be able to hopefully show us more improvement down the line. So he'll have that within the next couple months, and we'll assess again at the end of March where he's at. So we'll see how that goes. And then the only other one I want to bring up was the fire emergency call. So Linden Street, I don't know if you recall, there's a house on Linden that's a vacant house that we've been working with the owner. Okay, so basically this one still vacant, but there was a pipe burst because of that cold weather snap we had. And Attorney General has been working with building commissioner and I on getting the owner on top of getting, have a plan in place to do something with that house, because it's becoming, more and more dilapidated. And so basically Attorney General is now in the loop again. They were aware of this recent incident. So they're going to go ahead and put in a petition to have a receiver appointed. And so that's in the works. So unless you have any other questions on those items, I'll let Diana go ahead.
And I just had a quick question about the rice bar. Do you think is language an issue in addressing any of these?
We were thinking that potentially, but Maureen Lee was referred to us as that she has a bilingual trainer on her staff that Charles worked with previously and did great. I mean, it was more or less, he did do a turnaround and showed us dramatic improvement. This was last year. So, and then all of a sudden, during the pandemic, right, Diana, he just went downhill again. I don't know if it is a staffing issue on his end, but she is now working with the same.
There's a language barrier. So there's one staff member who speaks Spanish, mostly Spanish, that I can communicate with. But there was other staff members who speak Thai or Chinese, which I can't communicate with them. So that's why we had him work with Maureen Lee specifically, because she had someone who can speak, she speaks Chinese, staff member speaks Chinese, and then I believe it was Charles' son who was helping with the Thai translations. But then there's one staff member who really only speaks, like he speaks English enough to get by. But I explained, like when I went into the inspections, was explaining stuff to him in Spanish just to make sure that he actually knew what was being explained, because I don't think the reading comprehension is fully there, especially when you're looking at the code. It's kind of hard even when you do speak English. So I just wanted to make sure he understood. He's like an old school chef. So it's like little things I would find, like if he was preparing it was like egg rolls or something, and then I saw he had it on top of like a garbage can, which I talked to Monica about. Then she's like, oh, they used to do that back in the day, because if you're prepping stuff, you would like throw the excess right into the trash, but now you can't do that. So it's explaining little things like that. And the reason that we wanted him more to go with the consultant is because the violations that I was finding was priority violations, which those are the ones that lead directly to foodborne illness. So items like I found rice kept at room temperature when it should be in a warmer, kept over 135 degrees. So it's like basic things, those things that they should already know. So that's why we wanted to have the outside training to make sure that they fully understand like what's going on. Because I know with that manager, we've had issues. It's like authority issues, like the staff doesn't necessarily take his authority seriously. So he actually like was happy that me and Monica were coming in every other week, because he's like, my staff will listen more to you guys when you come and give me the reports. Like if I show the reports that it's saying that you guys are telling them to do it, they're more likely to listen than if he was just saying it to them.
Does the onus for interpretation fall on us, or does that fall on the owner?
I think technically it falls on the owner. I think we want to do everything we can to be accessible to people. So we can certainly find the money to bring in a translator if needed, or to translate materials. I don't think we want a language barrier or challenges with reading comprehension to be a barrier before compliance. So we have the resources to help make it easier for people to comply.
Yeah.
Okay. Just, it sounds like that's a significant issue there.
Yeah.
And it could be a significant cost to the department if we are needing to provide that.
No, but then the consultants, he's paying for the consultant. So at least that's not coming from the department. And he's worked with that consultant before. And like Tara said, we had seen previous improvement. So we're hoping that it'll stick this time, but it is coming out of his pocket at least.
I mean, they have an internal management issue if their workers aren't listening to
Right.
management and ownership, and we're not going to fix that. They need to fix
Right,
that.
right. No, I think we've provided what we need to provide on our end, and then it's up to them to, do the final steps.
Okay.
I could imagine it could continue to be a challenge though, if, whoever you're touching base with there doesn't fully understand what, what you're communicating.
The owner, from working with him, I think he has an understanding of what's going on and what we're asking of him, because this isn't the first time that we've gone through this.
Okay.
I do think we'll talk a little bit more about it on a later agenda item, but one of our goals is to come up with a sort of a process and a policy on how we can quickly translate materials. In which instances do we quickly translate materials? I think we'll talk about it more, but if someone says, oh no, I completely understand, is that sufficient, or do we want to provide them with a copy in their native language anyway? And I think we probably try to lean towards providing a copy in their native language anyway, just to make sure that there is no misunderstanding.
Right, because we seem to, I mean, I don't know if we had the issue with Hungry Coyote, but the owner did say he didn't understand the MOU. So I just want to be sure that we're doing our part to get it right.
Yes. Absolutely.
And then I'll continue with our report. So we received, like Kathleen was talking about before, the purple air sensors from the state. So the contract has been signed by Kate Fitzpatrick. It was sent out to DEP. So now I'm just waiting for them to get sent to us, which I think takes a couple weeks anyway. Once we get the sensors, we have 10 sensors, they have to be deployed within 60 days. I reached out to Dan Gudikans, the superintendent of the schools, and I reached out to all the principals of the schools. But I got a response from Pollard Middle School from one of the teachers that their science department was interested, but I think they misunderstood what the sensors were because they thought they could do indoor air testing. So I just sent him this week the website that shows what type of sensor it is to give them more of an idea of what it is. I'm still waiting to hear back from other schools because the caveat with the sensors is that they need Wi-Fi access. So that's why I was thinking to partner up with the schools would be good because they have Wi-Fi available. Because the sensor itself is gonna be set up in an outdoor location that has electricity and Wi-Fi access, and then anyone can go on the Purple Air website and see the live data as it's coming in. So since the schools are throughout the town, I figured that would be a good plan of action to try to collaborate with them, and then the data is there for anybody to use. So if any of the high school students or even middle school, like anyone who wants to use that data can use the data. So now it's just trying to bridge between us and the schools to see if we can get that collaboration going.
You know, I'd be happy to meet with you to talk about this too, because
Okay.
it's only a PM 2.5 sensor, so it really doesn't make sense to do indoors per se.
Right.
Unless you had both indoors and outdoor. You know, anyway, it's sort of complicated. Plus I was thinking more a high school, like AP stats or like an environmental science club kind of thing. So anyway, maybe we can like set up a meeting and talk about it. I also think we should start looking at locations like ASAP.
No, that would be good.
Cool.
No,
I'm
we'll
happy
set that
to
up
help.
after this. I'll
Okay.
email you in the morning and we'll set up something.
Yeah, cool.
Well distributed, but you could also be looking at the public safety buildings
Mhm.
and other municipal buildings that are going to have town supplied Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
Because
any
I think it
public
just has to
buildings.
be
Mhm.
open networks. We'll figure it out.
Mhm. Cool.
And if there is a location that we really want that doesn't have Wi-Fi, we can always pay to essentially put in a hotspot if we need to.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's some interest, like probably near the trains, like we'll figure out more locations. But we have 10, because I know with the middle school, they're like, oh, 2 teachers want them, they're in 2 different wings. And I was like, no, like we don't want to put them inside, they have to go outside.
Yeah, and the PM
Some will need
2.5 won't help them that much. Like if it was carbon dioxide, that would, yeah, whatever. Anyway, I don't want to hold things up, but.
All good. And then the last big thing was at the end of January, there was a demolition application that was submitted for Muzzy Ford for all those buildings there. It was a collaboration with the building department. Everything was submitted, I think, a Thursday night, and they wanted to demo Friday morning. So it was a little bit rushed, but we worked through it, worked with the contractor, made sure that I had all the paperwork that I needed in regards to asbestos removal and pest control. They were able to provide everything. And we worked closely with Eric Tardif to make sure that they were correct on the building side of things. Because the contractor did try to come in hot and really pressure us to get it approved very quickly. But the issue was that weekend was when the blizzard was happening. So with the asbestos removal, there was flashing and other pieces of the roof that were removed from some of the buildings. And there was concern that the buildings would collapse with the amount of snow that was coming. So that's why they were rushing to get that approval, more from a safety standpoint. They didn't want, with the heavy winds, blowing stuff off the buildings. So we just ensured with the building department that they had what they needed. I got what I needed. What we were happy about is that they have at least 2 pest control companies coming on site, checking different traps around. So that's what we were concerned with. The asbestos was successfully removed a couple months back. But again, because of that storm, that's why they pushed it forward. And if you pass by now, I think 2 of those buildings are already down. But they submitted everything that we needed, so they were good, in good standing with us.
Good. Okay. Anything else to report on environmental health?
I had a quick question. I was
questions?
curious, Diana, why environmental health was involved in this dog bite issue. Isn't that, it was a dog biting another dog?
Yeah, so I'm the backup animal inspector.
Oh, okay.
And what happened was, which the whole thing was crazy to me because it was so backdated. The state contacted me because I'm the backup. When it happened, I had forwarded the inquiry to Matthew Palmer, who is now, he's serving in place of Dave Parsons because Dave Parsons is still not back doing his job. because of health reasons. He hasn't come back yet. So Matthew Palmer was interim doing that. He had COVID that week, so then I got the inquiry. Basically, what the state wanted to do for the liability of the town was just to check to make sure that the dog was still alive, even though it was way past the quarantine, because usually in this situation, if the dog bites another dog, both dogs are put on a quarantine. The dog biting would be put on a 10-day quarantine. So even though it had already passed, they just wanted me to go to the house, check that the dog was still alive, looked healthy, and do like a backtrack quarantine.
When was the incident actually reported to the state?
December 9th.
It was reported on the 9th.
Yes.
And when
And
did
I didn't
Needham,
get notified until January 24th.
right? So what happened? I mean, that's more than just a little bit of a delay. The state, I
I
mean, is
don't
the,
know what happened. It was in the state's hands. And then I got in contact with the ACO, so the animal control officer from Boston. They had followed up with a dog who had gotten bit. They just wanted, the state wanted me to follow up with a dog who was doing the biting.
I know, but I thought animal control actually falls to the town, not the state. I mean, we have an animal control officer.
So the report, it depends on how the dog bite was reported. If it was reported through Boston, then they would report it to the state, and then we'd be notified if it was the dog in town that got bit.
Yep.
If it was dog in Needham.
And
that bit.
also this happened at a dog daycare in Dedham.
I don't know.
Say that again.
So it's all cross jurisdictional.
Yeah.
Problem, but you know, the report has to be where the incident occurred. So in which town did it occur? In Needham?
No, it occurred in Dedham at a dog daycare.
Right. So the problem is with the town of Dedham then, because the report had to go to Dedham first.
Yeah, well, the report really, yeah, with the place in Dedham, I think that place ended up getting fined. It was like a whole mess because they didn't have the records, and the state told me that they ended up getting some hefty fines because this should have been resolved way quicker.
To make sure it wasn't a problem with our processes in town. Sounds like
Oh,
it was
no,
not.
it's not with us. It was completely out of us. For me, I got it resolved within the day that I got it. I just called the resident because the state figured out where the address was, found a phone number. I contacted the owner and was able to pass by the same day and check on the dog. So it was pretty simple from our end.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
I had a question about just sort of, have you been continuing to follow the Hungry Coyote? How's he doing?
We got a
So,
long
Bruce,
That's
coming up.
that's on the agenda for 6:45. We'll be
Oh, all
talking
right.
about,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so moving on to accreditation report, Lynn.
Sure, and let's see, if I think Lynn is online. There's a brief report. Lynn, I don't know if you want to go over it. One of the items was the FAB, the Public Health Accreditation Board Pathways Program.
Yeah, wait, hold on, let me just get this video going. Okay. Yes, so the Pathways Program, we were tasked with putting together or submitting a crisis communication plan. We had probably half a dozen assorted communication plans that I cobbled together. It still needs quite a lot of work, but I was able to submit it to FAB. We will be getting a review and we'll get feedback on that plan and also on the other documents that I've submitted to them. At the same time, I have, as you know, as part of the pilot, I'm being asked to review and provide feedback to another community. And that is due at the end of February. So I'm hoping that we'll have some good information by March.
Great. Okay, questions for Lynn?
Okay.
All right, we're going to look forward to another update next month. Great. So next on the list is Carol with Mass Call 3 cluster.
Hi, nice to see everyone. I asked Tim if Elisa can speak and introduce herself and her work. She hasn't had that opportunity. So if there's time for me to say anything after, fine. But if not, this is Elisa Dockstader.
Hi, everyone. I know I've gotten to meet a lot of you at this point, but for those of you who I haven't, my name is Elisa and I'm working with Carol as her Mass Call 3 coordinator. I'm really excited to be here and learn from you all. I'm a current student at BUSPH and I'm utilizing this work as my practicum, which is exciting. And I'm really excited to help Carol sort of center everything we're doing through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. Prior to this, I worked in nursing in Utah for 5 years. And as I said, I'm currently at BUSPH and I'm in my last semester getting a certificate in human rights, social justice, and health policy and law. So yeah, I'm excited to get to know you all. Let me know if there's any cool things you're doing you wouldn't mind me popping in on. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Elisa. I don't know. I will say January was a busy month. It was unique and happy in the fact that I had the opportunity to co-facilitate 2 in-person TIPS trainings with Sergeant Jay Sullivan from Dedham. You'll remember that was SAPC. 9 of us were trained as trainers for TIPS. So it was really nice to be in person twice. The first one, as you can see, is Needham Powers Hall that Karen and her team worked hard to put together. And the second one was at the end of the month at the Dedham Town Hall. And basically, I'm grateful to have Elisa. I've been working, trying to put the structure of the grant together. You know, we got a slow start for a few reasons, and trying to work through municipal procurement procedures and contract with our DEI consultant and our technical assistance provider. You know, DPH and BSAS asked us to do a year-long strategic planning process for this grant award, which, as you know, we're with Dedham, Walpole, and Westwood. So I'm grateful, and I'm just continuing to keep connected with the work that Tim and Tiffany are guiding and helping out as I can. So good to see you all.
And see you. And with the Needham training, there were, as I remember last month, there were 11 sales to minors, but then a number of people didn't show up to the training. Is that right? There were like five or six that didn't show up to the training.
Mm-hmm.
And do we have any follow-up on that group?
So Carol or Karen could add some detail. I do know that the select board on Tuesday night voted on suspensions, and they did take into account whether someone had attended the TIPS training as a mitigating factor or whether they had skipped the TIPS training as a aggravating factor, for lack of a better word. But I know that they voted on suspensions. I believe there was one establishment that got a verbal warning. Most got a 1-day suspension or written warning. I believe there's one establishment that got a 3-day suspension for repeated violations. That was a hotel in the community.
Are they also, again, being allowed to determine when they want to have their suspension? So it's probably going to be on like a Wednesday night.
That I do not know.
Okay.
Sunday morning.
Or Sunday night. Yeah, exactly. But sometime where it's really not going to hurt them.
Can I ask a big picture question? I don't know if it's for Carol or Karen, but I've been following this local podcast, The Weekend Sober. It's chronicling some local residents' struggle with alcohol through the pandemic. It just seems like, you know, we know from the statistics, the sales numbers, things like that, like, are there efforts we could be doing, trying to reach more people? I think a lot of people have been, you know, increasing their consumption and things like that. I mean, we know that's been occurring. So it's really poignant podcasts, these two women, local parents. And then they've had some local guests on as well. So I just feel like, I don't know if there's movement.
Well, first of all, I appreciate hearing about that podcast. I've never heard of it, so I appreciate that. I think that's a powerful and courageous and wonderful thing. So thank you. You know, years ago, I worked at NORCAP in Norwood in evening treatment, and I 100% agree that the more we can talk about the disease of addiction, you know, a brain disease, and speak about the physiological components, and just the realities of it all with people we love and care about, will reduce the stigma and the perception of a moral failing or a choice, and then encourage people to reach out through whatever channel for support resources. So I'm always a proponent of trying to be creative to reach people, and just that podcast alone, I know Karen is typing that her camera doesn't work, but she has worked hard and has the Al-Anon meeting, and perhaps she'll promote that podcast. But I think collectively, all of us in public health, our work intersects with, you know, prevention and public health and wellness. And the more we can talk about options for recovery, more. Mass Organization for Addiction Recovery has a ton of virtual support meetings. With COVID, it was difficult, and then that pivot became a really powerful thing. And if you're ever interested, I could ask Miriam Franjulis to come on. She's the director of MORE in Boston. She would give us ideas, and she's amazing. So I say yes.
Thanks. I just wanted to point it out. I think there's a lot, you know, we're going to be unraveling the impacts of this for a long time. So anyway, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Elisa, too.
And Elisa, yes, thank you and welcome. Okay, why don't we move on to substance use prevention?
Hi, everybody. I'm really sorry that my camera is not working. I've never had this experience, so I'm very disappointed. And I could attempt to leave and come back, but I don't want to waste precious time here. So I'm happy to speak if you don't mind my camera being off.
That's fine, we can hear you just great.
Great, okay. Carol, and Kathleen, I'm really glad you brought up the two women who featured their podcast. In fact, we actually did promote them. I'll come back to them in just a minute, but they are a relatively new entry, I think, into the podcast world. They started last year, but it's a lovely partnership that they formed, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. But speaking of promotions, one of the things I would like to just touch on briefly, our parent action team launched a new initiative called TALK, which stands for Talk About Life with Your Kids. And it's featured primarily as a social media campaign because, as always, we try to reach our audience where they like to find things. And so social media, meaning Facebook and Instagram, which SPAN has pages in both, has been our focus for targeting our parents, our families, with bi-weekly messages that are brought about in a very supportive fashion. In other words, we're not trying to tell parents how to parent, but we're offering them support in how to establish open lines of communication with their child. And while our target was primarily middle and early high school, really it's for all children, parents of children of all ages. And one of the features that we mentioned in our initial launch on social media is that youth of parents who talk to their children about the dangers of substance use or substances early and often are 50% less likely to use drugs than those who do not receive these messages from their families from their parents. So we've started this campaign with the parent action teams, total brainstorm on really creative messages on how parents can open up conversations, establish trust, and do so in a really non-intimidating, appealing way, so that when the difficult conversations arise, that trust between parent and child is already established. So we're really excited about that. And it's a campaign we're hoping to continue ongoing. It's not just a one and done. So we have content now for every 2 weeks through the end of May, and we're looking to hope to continue that beyond. We've reached about 1,500 to 1,800 people so far on Facebook. So it's promising that we will continue to reach a number of parents. And then jumping down to our Stop Act grant, as Carol already mentioned, we did help organize the TIPS training that Carol and Officer Jay Sullivan conducted on January 10th. So thank you again, Carol, to you for all of your efforts on that. And as she mentioned, I don't want to be too duplicative, but we did have 21 people attend. And a little on the breakdown of that, there were 9 Needham businesses represented in that training session on the 10th. And of the 11 businesses in Needham who had a sales to minor violation back in December, 6 of those businesses sent employees to the training. And luckily, too, Officer Sullivan opened some seats to Needham businesses for the TIPS training in Dedham on the 31st of January. And so we were fortunate to have 6 Needham, 6 employees from Needham businesses attend the January 31st training. And of those employees, we had 2 more businesses that had sales to minor violations send employees to that. So now we have just 3 businesses out of the 11 who haven't been represented that we've seen at either of the TIPS trainings in January. So I'm happy to report that at least. And lastly, I want to mention SALSA. As you know, that program up at the high school, Students Advocating Life Without Substance Abuse, has really had a groundswell of participation with, I think, upwards of 200 members in the club. And last month, they had 36 students from the club contribute 117 hours of service. And one of the highlights of that service in January was that they were able to go in person back to the 8th grade wellness classrooms for the first time in 2 years. So since the start of the pandemic. And the reason that's so important is that the SALSA students who present in the wellness classes to the 8th grade students have received such tremendously positive feedback about the impressions they make on these 8th graders when they share healthy descriptions around decision-making and avoiding risky behaviors. And they teach them refusal skills as well. And they have them practice in the wellness classes with little skits. And we're just overjoyed really at the opportunity to have that peer-to-peer in person again. So I'm excited that that's hopefully going to be able to continue. And let's see, I think everything else is pretty much outlined in my report. Those were the things that I wanted to highlight. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Oh, yes. So Weekend Sober, the podcast. We actually did a post on our social media pages for SPAN back in January featuring Dry January. And for anyone who's not familiar with Dry January, it began in 2012 as a public health initiative from an organization called Alcohol Change UK. It's a British charity. And so the idea about Dry January is to kind of focus on the opportunity for adults to reflect on their own substance use behavior, particularly in this case, alcohol. And we decided to try it out, test the waters by just putting that out there on our social media pages as a gentle nudge to adults, parents, that they might want to use this as an opportunity to reflect on their own alcohol consumption. And in providing that post, we also provided some resources, and we put a plug in there for Weekend Sober as one of the podcasts. And actually, I'm glad to say the women who do that podcast actually gave us a little promotion as well. They posted us on their page too. So we're excited about that, and maybe there will be some more opportunities to kind of delve into that area of reflection on one's own use as it affects the influence of youth modeling and that kind of thing.
That sounds
That's what
great.
I have.
Thanks. So that fits in with what Kathleen was saying about looking at the larger view and looking back at adults and increased alcohol use during the pandemic. Thank you, Karen. Other questions for Karen?
Karen, do you have any insight into why salsa grew as much as it did?
I may have been a little bit premature since we were running late. I already.
Oh, she's on.
attendees.
Oh, okay, that's okay,
Sorry.
that's okay.
All right, well, we will catch up next month with that question. All right, public health nursing. That's our last item before the COVID update.
Yes, hello. And most of my update is COVID anyways. So this, I promise, will be massively different in February, but the January report is Hannah, Burnett, and I were perpetual motion machines. Hannah managed to do, I think she works in the office on average a day and a half a week and managed to do 11 COVID vaccine clinics. She's amazing. And myself and my team did pretty much nothing except COVID case investigation. Pretty much the whole month. We were able to contact, as I said, about 98% of all the pediatric cases, which numbered almost 600, 580 some odd PD cases, which was rough. And then I'll leave most of the conversation about COVID to Julie here in a second. The only other things we managed to put on the itinerary this month, both Hannah and I got our CPR recertifications, moving towards becoming CPR instructors, which we'll talk about again for the February meeting. And then Hannah and I both have students that we've taken on from BC. Hannah's is in on Tuesdays and mine is in on Thursdays. And besides that, not a whole lot else went on with us, and I'm open to any questions, and otherwise I'll let Julie take over on COVID.
So I do have a question. Hepatitis B,
Yes.
we're running way ahead of average. If you look at the last 2 fiscal years, are we having, what's going on with that?
Hep B is not one of the cases that we do phone calls with, so I am absolutely.
I'm looking at Hep C.
Okay.
Because we had 8 cases in 2020, 6 cases 21, and only half the year now for the fiscal year. We're up to 9 cases in 22.
Neither of the hepatitises are cases that we do follow up on, or are illnesses that there's a MAVEN follow-up required. So I don't have insight on that, unfortunately.
All right, we may want to get some insight into that.
Absolutely.
Just don't know why we're seeing an increase in hepatitis in the town.
Okay. That's something we can look into, definitely.
All right.
Okay.
But that was certainly that I noticed there.
Can I ask about the Legionella? I always ask about the Legionella case.
You do actually, and I'm really sad to report that I couldn't get this person to call me back.
Okay.
So I was not able to get information on that. They were even the first week of January. So I've had a solid 4 weeks of trying to get a hold of them, and no dice. So
Private residence address? Private residence, not like assisted living or anything?
yeah, no, it was residential, not assisted living or anything like that. So individual housing.
Okay. Thank you, Mary.
I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, just in order to get us back on time, you know, the board has had the report for the COVID-19 update already. Perhaps we could, you know, not go through it slide by slide, but just ask relevant questions about the report, since everybody should have had time to review this in advance.
That sounds reasonable to me. Okay, so then moving on to COVID-19. Are there questions for Julie on the data presented here?
So one question that I do have, I know it's a rolling average, which, you know, is going to be delayed a little bit just in terms of, you know, our incidence. As I see, it's still up at 7.8%. And I think we'll feel a lot more comfortable when it's 2.5 or below. And I'm wondering if we're, you know, rapidly trending in that area, or if you have more recent data to suggest that we're actually there at this point.
The percent positivity, you mean?
Correct.
So the percent positivity, I believe I ran it yesterday and it'll be 5.6-ish or 7-ish
Okay.
when they gave me the data last night. So it's lowering. We still had 200 and some tests run out of 4,000 and some that were 200 tests plus that were positive out of 400 and some for the last 2 weeks, 4,000 and some, so
Right.
somewhere around there. So yeah, it's going down. And hopefully it'll continue to trend down, but again, it doesn't include any home tests, it doesn't include any of the antigen tests, it's just the ones run by lab.
Right, but it's, you know, we have
It's
to,
a subset.
it's a subset, it may be a representative sample.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, I mean, I know we should get into a discussion about masking, and I would like to see some objective criteria, so we don't always have to have a meeting every time to say, okay, this is where we do it. And 2.5 is, you know, I think been a standard that a lot of places have adopted. I think CDC adopted that as well in terms of one of their cutoffs for when we say, okay, we can, you know, kind of reduce the mask mandate. And we're heading rapidly in that direction. So I don't know if there's a way that we can, you know, I know you wanted us to consider the municipal building mask mandate and whether or not we rescind that once we hit 2.5, which may be as soon as a week from now.
I think in part, and we can jump into it, I think in part it's, to me, it's not completely connected, but it is somewhat aligned with when the schools will go to, I think the superintendent's calling it mask-friendly policy. The state education commissioner said that the state mandate will expire for all schools on February 28th. A couple of reasons, and I think it was advised by some of the folks on the Joint Health and Safety Committee. We felt that the superintendent should wait at least 2 weeks after the end of February vacation. So for more planning time and if there is a spike related to travel, Needham's plan right now, which is still under development, but would be to end mask requirements in schools on the 7th of March.
And is the vaccine requirement of fully vaccinated or vaccinations up to date? Because it should be the latter.
So according to DESE only requires fully vaccinated, so 2 doses.
So as a town, I would suggest that we urge that vaccinations remain up to date, which at least initially, I don't think is going to have a big impact. But these kids are going to start needing boosters mid-spring. And let's not have another outbreak in town if we're going to go mask-free with kids who are unboosted.
So in regards to what, I guess I'm just a little confused, in regards to the masks coming off or in regards in general?
So
Because
masks
that will
come off
throw a.
for student, not for fully vaccinated. Masks come off for students who vaccinations are up to date. Okay, so if they're not eligible for a booster, they are up to date and masks can be off. All right, but once they become eligible for a booster, the masks go back on until they have a booster. They're going to need to keep track of that because that's going to happen probably when about April, 5-6 months after the boosters, after the vaccination became available to high school students.
But that contradicts DESE. I mean, they're saying.
I get that, right? But now it's no longer under state control. Now it's reverted back to town.
It is, but it makes it a little difficult to be able to do DESE and the town and have 3 different pockets of in person or out of school exposure, in school exposure, and then the mask mandate. They're not going to have any way to measure that, and they already know that now. They're not going to have anybody who can police that. So it's too hard to be able to have 3 different things. The nurses can't keep up. their staffing can't keep up. It's just not.
How do they know that
possible
they're
to be
fully
contradicted.
vaccinated now?
They have reports, but the kids, nobody's going to go around and say, you're not wearing a mask, just like we can't.
I'm not asking them
So-
to do that, okay?
Okay, so then, yeah,
So the policy, as I understand it, that Needham is planning to adopt is if they're vaccinated, you can go without a mask. But Desi even said, you know, if they're not vaccinated, they're supposed to be wearing a mask. Is that not what Needham is suggesting? Is Needham suggesting everybody goes without a mask at this
no,
point?
they're.
As of
they're-
the 28th, the state guidance is no masks, whether you're vaccinated or not, correct? Anyone?
No, that's
Okay,
that's
I
right.
was not aware of that.
So
Okay.
Desi's saying it doesn't matter if there's a mask or not. I mean, a vaccination.
And even the 80%, which we meet already, you don't have to have the 80%.
That, and I guess I'd be okay with that as long, again, as long as they're up to date. Because, you know, once that immunity wanes, you know, we're going to be looking at another outbreak. So as long as the vaccinations remain up to date, and those data are available. I mean, you know, the state's giving out those vaccines. I mean, I've got it on my phone now, you know, verified by the state. That is not too hard to do, and that's not too hard an ask to do either.
Well, the school can pull data. They have the ability and they have a different system that they can pull data. I'm just not sure that asking them to require it will really make that ability to be able to, same reason that we can't do it as a health department. I don't think the school can do it for their students, but we can put it under
And the
advisement.
reason, and the reason why would be that I might be 6 months out on Tuesday, you might be 6 months out on Thursday, and we don't have the resources to monitor who is coming, sort of, whose vaccine is expiring, for lack of a better word, or reaching the point where immunity is waned.
Correct. Plus there's then those who are still, who are considered a close contact versus those who won't, who need to mask for 5 days, and all of that just doesn't
That's
make it
yeah.
completely possible to mesh it all
But
together.
but that's
Um,
different. And I think that, you know, look, there's no exact science on boosters. I think, you know, a weekly poll is probably more than sufficient. So that we're kind of in the ballpark at least. But I think they could make a poll, and they could certainly, you know, tell students, you know, look, you are due for a booster within the next week or 2 weeks or what have you. You know, and if a week or two beyond that deadline, they don't get a booster, there's an issue because now they are not fully vaccinated or vaccinations are not up to date. But I think that needs to be our town standard, not what Desi says with fully vaccinated with just 2 shots. They have to maintain the vaccinations, whatever that means in the future, which we don't know. But right now, that means a booster after 5 to 6 months.
So the expectation would be that they would maintain their vaccinations.
Correct.
I think the issue in the schools is going to be the policing of that.
Yep.
How are they policing that we actually have, you know, 80% vaccinated students at this point?
So I guess it's not really being policed. That's
No,
what's
they're
being
not.
reported to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So because of that,
And if we,
they've been able
right,
to choose the off ramp. So they've applied for that, and gotten it, but
mhm.
they haven't gone down that road because the choices for the health and safety committee and the school, and the schools is to keep the masks on until the DESI date of the 28th at least.
Yeah, which they
We've
don't,
chosen
that,
not to do
that,
that
that,
for
that,
right now.
yeah, that they have to do. And it's very reasonable to keep them on for a couple of weeks thereafter to, you know, flush out the, you know, vacation starts and stops and all of that. But I'm just suggesting that as a town, you know, we don't have to listen to DESI anymore if this goes to town control now instead opposed to state control. And if it's going to town control, I would suggest that fully vaccinated is not enough. It's vaccinations up to date, which again, at least initially, should be a non-issue. I think it's going to become an issue in the future. I think we have some time to, you know, flesh out those details. But there's going to come a time where those vaccinations, where that immunization is going to wane. And these kids are going to be vulnerable. And, you know, the last thing we need is an outbreak in the town that's avoidable.
The challenge is, what about these kids who are not vaccinated right now?
That's a whole nother matter. And, you know, believe me, I would like to require that they're masked. You know, basically, if you have a vaccine, you're unmasked. And if you're not vaccinated, you should be wearing a mask. You know, if we have the authority to do that, that's something I think we should suggest. If we don't, we don't.
All right, I mean, I can certainly bring that back to the health and safety.
But But I thought we already said that we didn't think masking under 5 made sense, right? I mean, even when we put a mask mandate in, it wasn't for under 5.
We're not talking about under 5 here. We're talking about the schools.
No, well, you were saying you're worried about who can't be vaccinated, which is under 5 now.
Correct. Well, I'm
No.
worried about those who've only gotten 2 shots, who are going to be due a booster and aren't getting the booster. Those are the ones I'm worried about. Which, as I said, is a non-issue right now because of the timing of when boosters became available. Because that was late September, I believe, the boosters became available to the public, and that's about the same time that initial vaccination became available to that age group, or maybe a little bit earlier. But they're going to need boosters soon.
12 to 18 was back in May.
It was back in May, all right.
Yeah.
Because our booster rate is what right now?
Yeah, 12 to 15, it says
Do we-
Well, for
42%.
kids, yeah.
Yeah, do we know our
100%.
boosted rate for 12 to 18, for the 12 to 18 group?
We have, on the board, we have 12 to 15 and 16 to 19. So the rate is 68% boosted, 42% boosted.
See, I think we need to get that up to 80.
Yeah, so you're saying like an outreach campaign type of thing. I mean, you're not saying like, because there isn't a vaccine requirement in schools. There's, strongly encouraged, and we have a high uptake in our community. So
But there is, okay, I mean, what DESE did, I think, did not make a lot of sense. They're basically saying that schools can apply to reduce the masks if the kids are vaccinated at a certain rate, 80%, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so.
Plus a couple other metrics, but yeah.
Yeah, the problem is that fully vaccinated means nothing, because CDC moved well beyond that a while ago to vaccinations up to date, which means that there needs to be a booster. So right now, for the ones who don't have a booster, they are not, quote, fully vaccinated. They just aren't. So our real vaccination rate, if you're looking at that graph, is, closer to about 60% in the high school. That's
Yeah,
not, and that's insufficient, in my medical opinion, to be saying that we should be, just throwing caution to the wind and taking off masks on everybody. I think if we can get that up to 80%, then yes, then we follow the guidance.
So DESE clearly, the commissioner Riley is clearly responding to political pressure. DESE has always focused on fully vaccinated rate. It has never really zeroed in on the boosted percentage. So they've never used the boosted number as one of their criteria. I think that I think part of that is intentional. I think part of that reflects pre-Omicron thinking.
And we're post-Omicron now.
Yes. So I guess I would want to try to understand, are we saying this is a topic for more discussion? Are we saying this is the public health division needs to keep offering vaccine clinics and make them more available? Or we're saying we'd like to think about an emergency order that is fairly narrowly targeted, but says,
I think we have a little bit of time to work before we get to that.
okay,
I am suggesting that, our department work with the school department, let them know that we think, as a, Board of Health, I hope this is, we can take a vote if we need to, that what we're looking for is not 80% quote fully vaccinated, but the current guidance, which is 80% up to date, which is CDC guidance. And we're not there yet. And we would like to work with the school department to get to at least 80% of our students boosted. And we want to do that, before the time that Needham is planning to take off all the masks, which would be 2 weeks after the 28th, so March 14th.
March 7th is what they're targeting.
Oh, March 7th, okay, because it's right, that's 2 weeks after vacation, sure, okay,
Okay.
all right, but that gives us,
We
about
have seen
a month.
interest in vaccination tail off right now. I think,
A lot, not just a little, a lot. Like we are the clinic and 3 people showed up.
Yeah,
So
but I think we need to enlist the help of the schools to get the
what
kids.
we've emailed them. Hannah's done both. She's actually doing Babson College because all the Poland's done. But she has tried to get in touch with schools and said they'd go to the schools and do it, but have not heard back.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is, we got an email yesterday, Elliot's holding a vaccine clinic. There's not real kind of meaningful communication coming through to parents who either, who need whose children need the booster or who are choosing not to be vaccinated. There's truly no meaningful communication to reach those folks.
Like
other than-
individually, because that could be some issues.
No, or even, it's fine to send out even to do like a forum for parents. Have you chosen not to vaccinate your children? Perhaps we hold something where we.
But that doesn't seem to be an issue in our town. I mean, the vast number of people got, their kids have, got their initial
Right, yeah,
vaccination.
well,
series.
even when I look at the boosters,
It's just
this
the
age range,
boosters.
they've been eligible for boosters for some time now, and they're clearly
Correct.
choosing not to do it for some reason.
Well, either that or they haven't got, or that they just don't think it's that important and haven't gotten around to it. But, if it's, hey, this is what lets us get the masks off in the school, suddenly there's an issue of, oh, this is important, let's just get this done.
Mhm.
Okay, so we can certainly talk to, I think Mary and Tiffany probably talked to Susanna Hahn, who's the Director of School Health Services, multiple times a day. I talk to her at least twice a week. We could certainly bring that back also to the Joint Health and Safety Committee, Rob. I do think it's a question, what's the most effective way to reach people with information? And there are always new ways to try to reach out to groups. I think that's something we should continue to try to find new ways. I do think that Hannah and her team have been trying to be creative about how they offer vaccine clinics. And so some of it, I think, is, people will be vaccinated if there's another COVID spike, right? If it seems like it's necessary, they will start doing it. So to your point, if there's a requirement that says you have to get vaccinated, maybe that does drive people to get vaccinated.
Or even just the idea that the masks will be coming off in schools. That may drive people to choose to vaccinate, or to get their immunizations up to date in their kids,
Right.
That, it's a teachable moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
I mean, the uptake on boosters is lower, right, for this age group. We know that across the country. And, many people had COVID in the break. So now we're gonna, I just to think of a parent who's had their kid fully vaccinated, they got Omicron, and now they also have to get a booster. Obviously, there were some advantages for young people that you had to go in quarantine if you didn't have a booster. So some would go and get it. But I do think you need to, I know we have a really high uptake, but you can see it even in our adult population. We're not at the 95% that we are with the primary series. So I don't know if some sort of outreach is needed. I also I think it's problematic to tie that to masking.
We're certainly a lot higher. I mean, I'm looking at 30 and above, and we're hovering at 80%. As opposed to hovering around, 50, 60% in the younger groups.
Right. Because those parents, it's time, but it's also parents are more resistant in that age group. At least nationally. I mean, I don't know about specifically our community. So.
Tiffany,
And if they just got Omicron, then you're locked out of getting.
So that's actually what I was
Getting
going to
boosted
ask.
now.
Clinically, if you were fully vaccinated and you got Omicron, how long until you can get your booster?
You can get it once you're cleared for quarantine.
10 days.
Yeah, right away now. You can, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
But they still consider antibodies for 90 days, so 3 months.
Right, so you could get boosted after 10 days. The thinking is you don't have to get boosted for 90 days.
Correct.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I guess that's potentially harder to tease out because we do know that there have been high volume of school age cases over the last 6 to 8 weeks.
And if you only had an antigen test that wasn't recorded, you don't have a record that you had it. Too.
I mean, it's all imperfect, and I
Yeah.
and I keep coming back to, I care about hospitalizations and deaths. And, we flooded the hospitals with Omicron. That's what we're trying to prevent here. I mean, I don't think the kids are going to die, but I think that, we're going to have kids passing into adults who may wind up getting hospitalized. And that overtaxed the system here. And we just can't have that happen again. I mean, my hospital had a patient who died, awaiting transfer because there were no beds available. None in the state, and they died waiting to get a bed out of state because there were no beds in Massachusetts. Okay, very well publicized story on NPR. So, and I'm sure it's, those are underreported because no hospital wants to actually talk about it.
Sure.
But we only have one hospital in Needham and it got overwhelmed with Omicron. If we can prevent that from happening again, we should try to do that.
Okay. So is there, I want to be clear about, I guess, what next steps the board would like the public health division to take. Just so I make sure we make progress on the issue. So is it that we want to reach out to the schools about additional, maybe a superintendent's update that we could help inform about why getting boosted is important? Maybe the superintendent or some other type of newsletter that broadly received by the school age community.
Well, I mean, I think the superintendent is going to be ultimately sending a message to all the families about, what the Needham plan is, given that the DESI changed the end of February. So you might want to tie it to that. Like we could craft something to go with that message that parents could read about what we feel is the.
Maybe something to the effect of, if we're going to be successful in this policy, we need to get all of the kids who are eligible boosted. And right now we're not there.
Okay.
And I think that might be, might be the best way to phrase it, right?
Okay.
Make it, I can certainly bring that up in health and safety.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, because it sounds like it's not from lack of trying from this department of getting these kids vaccinated and running multiple clinics.
Yes, I do know. We always want to figure out new ways to reach out and get the information available to people. I do think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that in November, vaccination interest was lagging. With the surge in Omicron, we filled up clinics in December and the first half of January. And as cases have started to go down, the interest in vaccinations and the number of people show up for clinics, the number of people who keep appointments that they made online is way off, right?
We don't have people making appointments online.
Okay, sorry.
So yeah, it's not going.
But interest in vaccinations picked up.
Oh,
when Omicron was
absolutely.
spiking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hardcore.
I mean, think about this. We just need another variant that just got discovered in Germany yesterday that's going to, make the leap here and cause the next spike. And all of a sudden, we're behind the 8 ball because we didn't have our kids vaccinated. Right? I mean, that's how fast this happened with South Africa. It was within a couple of weeks that we started seeing cases rise.
Okay.
Right? And got overwhelmed very quickly. I mean, look at that spike. To say that that's not going to happen again is ludicrous. All right. We didn't see the deaths, which is good, but we still saw all those hospitalizations, and that's what we need to care about.
Okay. So Kathleen and Rob and I, we can take that to the meeting on Monday.
Yep.
I also wonder, I don't know if we have the resources to offer this or if the schools do, that if there are parents who would like to kind of have an exchange with someone in town about vaccination, because I think there are still some hesitant folks, or even about the booster, there are parents with boys who are still talking about myocarditis. And so if they want to have an exchange with someone, if we could offer that, whether it's.
So if it's one-on-one, I would actually push them to their pediatrician more because we
Okay.
don't know their specific
That's
concerns
yeah.
or needs. If it's in general, why booster is good for the population, we absolutely could do it, but
I do
a
worry,
one-on-one
depending
discussion.
on the format, that could
Yeah.
prompt sort of very extreme positions on both sides to come less to ask questions and more to make their sort of outlier view known, right? You could see that very easily having attracting a radicalized sort of element. But we certainly can figure out some information and resources. We could set up, potentially with Susanna, we could set up a brief presentation that people could log into, and with the sort of instruction that following up with your pediatrician makes the most sense if you have questions or concerns about how the vaccine would impact your child's health.
Yeah, I mean, most of those myocarditis issues, I think, was due to the timing of the vaccine. The booster isn't so much the issue, it's the initial vaccination series.
Okay.
I haven't seen a case since then.
Yeah, but that's why they've started spreading it out. They're thinking that making the Pfizer, 4 to 5 weeks instead of 3 weeks, and moving out Moderna a week or two, because it's lowered the incidence of myocarditis significantly.
Yeah. Okay, so it's 6:21, so I think we should move on.
Yes. We picked up a little bit of time there.
We did, and thank you, Julie, for all the slides. And it certainly provoked a lot of discussion. Okay, so we'll move on to 1688 Central. Discussion about the scope of services.
I did want to bring this back, and I know that I had to depart the last meeting a little bit early. Based on feedback from the board, and Mr. Chair, you know that you, Kathleen Ward-Brown, and I had a meeting with town council to talk about the scope. I did also talk to concerned residents about it and heard some feedback. And one of the things that they suggested, which I thought made a lot of sense, was if you're retaining an outside expert, does it make sense to have that expert's opinion sort of siloed from what is recommended? So review the literature, come up with your own plan, then review the proposal from the proponent who's proposing development, and then sort of do a compare and contrast. Like, I didn't propose this, but it's a reasonable solution. Oh, this is a great option. It goes above and beyond. Or someone's trying to pull a fast one on you. What is being proposed is insufficient based on the sort of the totality of the case. So I did incorporate that into the revised scope that will probably add quite a bit to the costs, but that they would be doing essentially 2 reports. One, their sort of own recommendation without any idea of what has been proposed previously, and then reviewing what has been proposed and making comments and edits on it, and then essentially comparing and contrasting. That was sent out to 17 licensed site professionals and companies in the Metro West region this afternoon. I did not include anyone who had worked with, to my knowledge, the expert retained by the developer. I also did not use any of the companies that I believe the town has used on previous situations. There are limited state finance laws give us limited ability to choose something other than the lowest price bid. If, so we invited a lot of people to provide quotes. Anyone in theory could provide a quote. If there was someone who proposed submitted a price quote that had a conflict of interest, I think we would try to figure out how we could disqualify or consider another bid. If someone with a conflict of interest was the lowest price bidder, we would work to try to make sure that we're able to consider other bids that didn't have a conflict.
And how, I mean, that's the one thing I don't see in the proposal, right, is a conflict of interest statement requirement. How are we going to determine the conflict?
So that's a fair question. I guess my thought is that anyone who's done business with the proponent, right, the developer that's proposing the project, would be considered to have a conflict of interest.
Okay.
So we did ask for references of work from each of the applicants. We could sort of be more comprehensive and say, in addition to the 2 or 3 references you gave me, have you ever worked with the following?
That's
As
what
part of our
I'm suggesting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this in my sense of this is it's an issue of transparency. The consultant may come up with exactly the same solution, but it needs to be an independent evaluation. And we want to make sure, so I really want to make sure this is as independent as we can make it.
Yep. If we what I essentially did is I did extensive research in the state's database of licensed people. It includes people whose license have been suspended, revoked. Obviously, we didn't do anything like that. The state database also includes if there's been violations found or investigations by the state board. We didn't include anyone who had a violation or an investigation. Obviously, I guess we could have if someone had a violation that didn't result in suspension, but I decided to just focus on people with kind of clean records. I do wonder about the overall cost. As written, and Kathleen, you've talked about this, it is rather open-ended. The town did put aside in the special warrant article at the board's request, specifically Steve, you were the one who advocated most for it. Essentially a special consultant or technical expert warrant article. So we have enough money in there to fund, you know, any conceivable costs here. I just would not want to use the entirety of that on one issue. But you know, if we believe it's an important issue and we use half the money and then we have to go ask in, you know, a year or two for another infusion, that's what the intent of the warrant article is for.
So since it seems to be pretty open-ended, is there, I mean, other than the quote, I guess, is there a way to control costs? You know, if we get a quote and then there's a huge overrun, you know, because they only do half the work and we can't really make an evaluation.
Yeah. So
how do we control for that?
The town, I mean, the town will reserve the right not to pay bills unless it has received deliverables. So, you know, the town will not support a cost overrun. We would have to do a contract amendment that would require the assistant town manager for finances approval, which would probably not happen, in order to the town manager's signature, which I know would not happen. They're very concerned about contracts increasing in value. That's why they have us sort of follow this particular process. The challenge you outlined of what if the costs are going over anyway, and the person who we've hired basically is like, if you don't give me more money, I'm not doing any more work. There are legal remedies we can pursue then. That I'm not sure how we guard entirely against that. If someone who has to write 2 reports and spends all of their time and money writing the first report, I'm not sure how we guard against that, aside from then we could sue them essentially and try to get them.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've done the best you can, right? I mean, we've only selected companies that seem reputable on a number of different dimensions.
Yes,
Right.
they do range in size from large companies you've heard of that, you know, have huge volume of employees to small operations that have 2 or 3 sort of experts that have gotten together to work together and hung out a shingle.
Do we know if it's like fixed fee or time and materials? Looks like, or can it be one or the other? I mean,
It is a total all-in price quote. So now that
okay,
that
they can't go above it.
right, someone could put in $1 million. I think that, you know,
Right.
for us, that will be the challenge of if someone comes in with a bid that we think is comprehensive but much higher than we think the funding available is, then we have to potentially revise the scope and go out again.
Mhm.
If someone came in at $100,000, we wouldn't have the money to be able to complete that.
They'd have to do like a change of scope to say, you know, you guys changed what we had to do, so it cost us this X much more, whatever.
Yeah, and that's what the town avoids doing at all
Right.
costs.
Yeah.
Well, of these 2 deliverables, what's the best price you can give us if we have these 2 deliverables instead of these 3?
Mhm. Mhm.
I know there's interest, I believe, in the topic. So the timeline, and Kathleen, you helped advise, the timeline is in theory 90 days. In practice, we think it would be less than that, potentially half of that amount of time. It is sort of a complicated issue. It's political, it's legal. We have been working with town council, who works with opposing counsel and the developer if we have questions. So one of the things we said is we would like to have our consultant walk the site. The developer does not have to allow that, but we've requested it, and for appearance's sake, it would certainly seem like it's a smart idea to allow an independent expert to have the same access that the expert we retained has. So we did have to put into the scope that there were limitations. We can't require something that we don't have the ability to force access to, but we believe we've written it in a way that encourages access from the developer and will allow our expert to take advantage of that.
I think it's pretty clear that, you know, zoning asked our opinion.
Yep.
Our opinion is going to be based on this report.
Yeah.
If we can't get adequate data on the report, our opinion to the, you know, to the zoning board will reflect that.
Yes, I think that should hopefully be understood by
Yes.
both parties.
I would expect so.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, there is a member of the audience who's raising their hands. Didn't necessarily anticipate public comment, but the board is always within its rights if it chooses to recognize someone who's attended a public meeting.
Sure. Happy to recognize you.
Thank you very much. My name is Holly Clark. I first thank you for all the time and attention that everybody is putting into this. I just wanted to be clear as I read the RFP, when you said that information will be available to the LSP, that includes all of the information that's been submitted to the board, not just what was in the fire department files or what's in the state DEP, but all of the emails that the health department received and the submissions to you as well, because that has.
The idea was that everything minus the proposal and the materials from the developer would be assessed by the expert first in sort of a silo. They would come up with, based on these conditions, this is what I recommend, or this is what my plan is. Then they would look at what was proposed by the developer, and as we've discussed, how do you know, this is above and beyond, this is great, this is not exactly what I do, but reasonable people can disagree, and this is an appropriate way, or no, this is insufficient for the following reasons.
And so the LSP could indeed say, yes, testing is required, even if this proposal isn't. Not that he's gonna do it.
They
I
can say it,
understand
but that doesn't obligate the developer to give them access to it.
Right.
But they could say, you know, based on this, we really need this to make a fully informed
But that
report.
would come back to Dr. Epstein's point, that if this LSP said, looking at all of this data, a phase 2 analysis is required. And if the developer said, I'm not going to do that, then the board would respond about what that would mean in terms of approving. Is that, I think that's what you've been.
Yes, I don't think that would automatically mean the board would say no, although it certainly would make the board a lot more likely to say we can't positively endorse something.
We would definitely respond.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see what they come up with.
Yeah, we have to see what they say.
Right, I mean, nobody, and to be clear, nobody's hoping to find a huge problem, but if there is a problem, that the board will, this LSP will have the information to be able to tell the board that, and so that the town can then act upon it. That's my request, and my question, which, I mean, if all the information you've gotten is going to this LSP, and the LSP is gonna look at that all information and then say, okay, given this, this is what I think should happen, and then look at the other thing, I think that is a really good thing.
Yes, and I think, you know, we've talked about it a little bit, the board talked about it. There's, you know, what is the baseline required? There is what is sort of an appropriate proposal given sort of the community interest and the need for transparency. You know, so there's differing standards. And what is the minimum legally required is probably different than that higher standard. We don't have the ability to force that higher standard, but, you know, the developer's attorney has indicated that they would try to meet that. I think they've made some public statements to that effect. So if they follow through on that, that would potentially be more access.
Right. Well, the planning board could say, give access as a condition. They could. to give access to the Board of Health's expert, like they have put in their vote, they're continuing to deliberate, but in their draft opinion, they're saying the Board of Health is gonna make recommendations. And in fact, I think it says something like the Board of Health's expert will oversee, and the Board of Health, the planning board could say, if the LSP requests, give him access. And this may be not necessary, but it just maybe is.
So I do think, and Rob, you were on it as well as Kathleen, we did have a discussion with town council, and town council really tried to lay out what he thought was immediately within our authority versus what wasn't within the town's authority, but might be allowed. And so I think this is potentially a murkier area. Can the planning board say to the developer, in order to build this, you have to give the Board of Health act, like, can he specify a non-defined action, right? Not like you have to give access, but you have to do whatever the Board of Health says. I don't think there's I don't think town council had a clear opinion on whether you could write into a binding decision something that was ambiguous. So you have to do whatever the Board of Health says is not, I'm not sure that town council believes that passes legal muster in a planning board decision. If, you have to afford the Board of Health this type of access or this specifically, that town council believes could be incorporated into it. So I think it'll depend in part on what the planning board puts in. But that was part of the focus of the call we had with town council was where is the line between what is specifically we are allowed to do and where is their murky area, and how do we avoid being in the murky area?
Well, and I so respect all the time that you put in all of this. It doesn't seem murky to me to say you will give access to the licensed site professional to do a walk of the property.
Mhm.
That's just, and if the person said no, and as I said, maybe in effect, you've got, the stick is there anyway, because if you don't, and then the LSP says, okay, well then, I can't tell you part of this. Or.
Right, but that, again,
Yeah,
I mean, I think that would.
Like I said, it may be there anyway, and I would defer to that, but it just seems to me that.
I think that's a question for the planning board rather than for us.
Right.
We've been asked to provide an opinion. We'll probably provide it based on the information that we have available.
Mhm.
If the LSP doesn't have that information, that's reflected in our report back to the planning board. The planning board can discuss with the developer, at that point, whether or not they're satisfied.
Right, or whether they're in compliance with whatever condition, and I think I said to Tim, who was kind enough to take my call at one point, that they kind of lateral the ball over to you, and I appreciate that has happened, but it also kind of puts us in the, do we go here, do we go there? But again, we so appreciate the effort that you're making and the conscious concern about the potential risks here for health and safety. And I think the planning board is looking to the Board of Health for your expertise. And, we have faith that you're going to put health first rather than whatever the other concerns the developer may have about testing and financial implications of that.
And we do feel that the independent reviewer should have access to the site. That's how we feel they could do the best assessment, is to get on the site. And, again, we would like to achieve that with working with the developers representation to make it a mutual thing, rather than to get into a situation where somebody's being asked to force somebody to get on the site or do tests.
It would be nice. It
So
would be nice
that that's how we feel we'll get a good independent.
Right. No, again,
Assessment.
we very much appreciate the care that went in here, and knowing that this person will have all the information, the statements from, they're really witness statements that didn't get filed as complaints before, but are now information that you all have that nobody had before. And an LSP, able to take all of that to say, okay, this is what should happen, is a good sign.
Could I
Okay.
just quickly comment?
Yes.
My name's Maggie Abruzzi. The planning board has kind of kicked this over to the Board of Health. The planning board is going to allow, they're going to give the permit. And one of the conditions of the permit has something to do with the Board of Health, but they're really looking, it appears to me, to the Board of Health to enforce anything. And so there's kind of this murky area of whose job is it to make requirements. And I fear the developer kind of skirting around because now you're split between two places. I was wondering if the Board of Health would consider letting the planning board know that they would like to see a condition that that the developer provide access to the property. Because I'm not sure the planning board knows that you guys would like to have access to the property. It would like your expert to have access to the property. That isn't clear. I'm not sure where the communication is. And the second thing is, who would say, let's say, whatever analysis is done, and this is not an appropriate place for a childcare center to be built. Who would say that that is the case? If they've already, the planning board has already allowed the permit. And do you guys have the authority to say you can't build?
So you're the expert on this one, Tim. I believe we actually do. Because they have to get a building permit. So the planning board may say yes, from a zoning standpoint, sure, go ahead. Then they have to go to building comes to us and says, you got to sign off on the plan for the building. And we might not sign off on the plan for the building. Is that kind of how this works?
So public health emergency powers are fairly broad. I think it would potentially be more likely to be you cannot build this versus, so I think it's less likely to be that versus in order to have this type of use and expose whoever is going to be at this location to a potential environmental hazard, remediation is required and it has to be this in order to allow essentially the safe and healthy use of the location.
Okay.
I think that would probably fit in a little bit more easy with the emergency powers that the public health, the Board of Health has under Chapter 111.
So that would be the enforcement, the Board of Health saying to the building commissioner, don't issue the building permit because
Unless you meet the
we're
following requirements.
satisfied with
Yeah.
that. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. for
Yeah,
clarifying.
and for what it's worth, I mean, if we're going to be erring on the side of safety, what we would come up with without having expert opinion is probably going to be a heck of a lot more stringent. Right? Because, again, I mean, the expert might say, you really don't need anything. And if we don't have that information, then we're going to go with what we've got.
And I think this is analogous, and Steve, you were the chair at the time, with the negotiations we had with the developer of
Moderna.
Yeah, Madera on Greendale, where very close proximity to microparticle emissions from traffic. All of the air intakes were directed to be on the back of the building. The filtration was
It's more vague,
substandard.
Substandard, yeah.
And so, we had a negotiation that didn't involve a lawsuit, but we sort of stated clearly, we believe we had specific powers under Chapter 111, Mass General Law, to take steps to protect the health of residents in the community, and that we thought these people who were the future residents would be at risk potentially from microparticle emissions, and therefore, to get over our objections, you have to take specific steps to make the building safer for those future residents.
Which they did.
Right, and so they agreed to a series of, we signed an MOU, they agreed to a series of steps to improve the conditions for the people who would live there. Including higher filtration.
Yeah,
more frequent
they
maintenance.
redesigned where the filters were going, and
That was the biggest one.
yeah, it was the redesign that was the big one for them.
They weren't happy with it.
No, they weren't.
Okay, thank you
Thank you.
for coming and for your questions and comments. Okay, so you'll keep us updated on what progress we're
Yes.
making in terms of
And I can,
getting
I don't know that there's, to answer the question, I don't know that there has been board-to-board communication. I can make sure that I'm in touch with the Director of Planning and Community Development and let her know sort of the result of this meeting. So that can certainly happen. If the board wants it to be more formal, I can draft a letter on the board's behalf to the planning board. But I think staff communication would be sufficient. I can certainly CC the board on the email. That's helpful.
Why don't we start with that? Okay. So the next item is synthetic field turf testing results. I'm not sure this needs to be a long discussion, but since we have this information, I just thought that we should have the opportunity to discuss it if people had questions.
All right, so we found acetone.
We found acetone.
And you know, I see the report saying, you know, yeah, it could just be artifact. I'm just wondering if it makes sense to do a retest at enough, you know, at some point to verify or refute that. And if so, at what time point to do that?
Well, except for you found acetone in all 3 samples, so it's there. I think the comparison value is the question, and we used a residential standard, which is very conservative. If you used a commercial or industrial, it'd be like, you know, 100 times that. So I think it's kind of a nothing, but we can.
Do you think it's low enough that we could, you know, continue just monitor that, and obviously the next time we run this, because we will run it again, you know, we pay attention to that, and if it's rising, then we kind of start to address it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you would do to address it, but yeah, I mean, it's like the standard we have is 0.8, and like the commercial standard is like 3,500, right? So this is a super conservative comparison value, which we did intentionally because we wanted to make sure there was any indicator. So anyway,
my
sorry,
question, my question is that a reasonable thing to assume with leach out of the material in the field, or is there another source of it?
So Ed, I was going to add something too. Can I quickly come in here? I did talk to Wendy, and she's the woman, she's the environmental engineer at Fuss and O'Neill. She mentioned to me that acetone is a widely used solvent in labs, and sometimes it can't be all removed. So she's almost thinking that it was from the lab in such a low amount. And then she also said she based that on the past, since we've never had a hit of acetone of that amount. So that was her thinking, is that it was a lab related hit. So
yeah,
right,
I mean, it's very odd to me. It seems odd to me that the acetone would show up even at a very low level, unless you know the material that the fields are composed of is leaching it, but I don't think that that's a reasonable source.
and it's so volatile, it would have been gone a year ago, for one. Yeah, I think, although they didn't run a blank, right? A field blank. That would be how you would know, like if you had to send a canister that hadn't been sampled and then had the lab run it. In the past, I thought they did a blank, but we can follow up next time.
Yeah, they probably should run a blank. Yeah, I agree.
I can remind them of that.
Yeah.
Incorporate that into the scope, and maybe we can target to do it earlier in the fiscal year. So maybe we could do it in July or August, less than a year between the tests.
And we really just, I mean, I would just focus on that rather than running the whole gamut, unless we're scheduled to run the whole gamut.
Yeah.
You know, in some ways, I think if this is a lab error and they hire the lab, you know, they should be responsible for some of the costs of this. But we really just want some reassurance on this one element. That's the only reason we'd be doing anything early, right? We cut down the expense considerably if we focus on, you know, on one or very few elements that we need to test for.
Sure.
How often do we run these tests?
I think it's once every 2 years now.
Yeah, every other year. Yeah.
Do it more frequently if we want, so there wouldn't be anything that would preclude us from doing it. I mean, if the board wants, we could do it this spring, but we could always certainly do it in the summer, which would be next fiscal year.
I mean, if that makes sense from fiscal years, I mean, it's a very low exposure, as everybody is saying. It might make sense just to test for acetone this summer, and if we're clear, then, you know, then we're good.
Cost wise, it's probably the same, because you run a suite, you know, for the samples, and if you're sending somebody out there to collect the sample, it's probably about the same, but I don't know, Tara, maybe you can see.
Sure, I
People
can-
cost money, right, getting them out there.
Yeah, I figured that, but you know, at the hospitals, you know, they run the analyzer with all 20 tests. But you know, if I only ask for one, you get charged one fee. If I ask for another one, they tack on another fee up to the whole panel. So that's why I'm thinking it might be a little less expensive. You never know.
And they did find a couple of other compounds. The 2-methylpropene and the carbonyl sulfate.
Yeah, I mean, for all of those, yeah.
And I'm not sure, Kathleen, you would know better than me, if those are things that we should be concerned about. It certainly seems like the carbonyl sulfide is pretty common in the atmosphere anyway. And there's no known toxic values for the 2-methylpropene.
Yeah, and those were both, they're called ticks, they're tentatively identified compounds, those. So I wouldn't actually put any faith in the actual values that are reported. It just means they were identified on the site. It's sort of like a generic lab run. It's hard to explain how you identify those. They're often used when you have no idea what's on the site. You run a bunch and just see what shows up. So, so I don't, you know, I don't put a lot of faith in those. I just can't remember if they showed up previously. I feel like the carbonyl sulfide might have, but maybe Tara remembers. I can look back at the old reports too and see what it looked like. I don't think they compare to the old stuff, old data.
Yeah, I can look that up if you want me to pull that other report up, and I could share that with you.
Okay, yeah, we can look
That would be a good idea, but I don't remember them.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's a change, when we test for the acetone, we could just test for those other two things. If it's not a change, then we probably don't need to.
Those might be hard to test for specifically since they're not part of the suite that we typically do. It's of the lab method. Those just sort of showed up in the ticks. I don't know how to explain it, but we could talk to them too and ask Tara. I'd be happy to do a call on that one if it would be helpful. So, okay,
sure.
Thanks.
All right. Okay. Great. Okay. Pest list time. It's 6:53. Pesticides.
So there are
and the
two other
honey
items on the
coyote.
list. If I could, and we do have Ally, who led the project, our food program intern. Mr. Chair, you were on a webinar or not a webinar, Zoom call with a concerned community residents, myself, the Department of Public Works, and a few other town officials, where that resident expressed concerns about a number of the town's operations.
Yes.
We indicated that we try to help that resident, and one of her causes is an interest in reducing chemical use in the community, both fertilizers and pesticides. Ally led the work that we intended to do in this area, which was to work on a brochure, to work on a pamphlet, to update some information that had been developed and disseminated, I think, a decade prior. The resident has indicated they don't think it's sufficient. I think when we had previous discussion here, it wasn't a full discussion. There was definitely some concern about word choice and whether it was too far, I guess is the right word. The resident doesn't think it's far enough. Some people are concerned it's too far. I think the goal of the project is still a good one, which is to encourage where possible people to reduce the use of chemicals. I do know that the resident is quite frustrated, and I will try to connect with her to talk more about it. I just don't know that we can give her what she's looking for. It is I think it is a laudable goal to reduce the use of chemicals. I don't know that this person's position on that issue is, you know, it's a very extreme position. She's a very passionate advocate for the cause that she believes in. But I don't know that we're going to
And at least at last town meeting did not have the support of the town.
Correct.
So
What did not have the support of the town?
the idea of banning all the
Oh.
chemicals.
I do, you know, I think there's value in trying to move towards this goal. I think the resident wants to move faster than the town possibly can. I think the resident wants a position that, you know, is advocated by a relatively small group of people who are, you know, on one far side of an issue.
Mhm.
The town has taken steps to reduce pesticide. Some of it is required. There's integrated pest management that's required by the state regulation at all schools. The
The brochures that you put out here, at least some of these kind of imply that Needham has moved totally to organic as opposed to IPM.
So
Is that true or not true?
No, there's still integrated pest management at the schools and at town buildings.
Okay, because I don't think that's what this actual brochure was suggesting. You seem to say that Needham had moved away from that and to organic.
So integrated pest management.
Yes, the town at meeting, we have made a decision to model best and safest practice by adopting an organic land management policy within 2 years. That's right in what you gave to us, supposedly coming from us.
Is that on the pesticide advisory or the document after?
The document afterwards, second page.
That thing needs work.
We
Grab.
don't need that. That's got all sorts
We
of.
cite a book from 1994 for one. And yeah, if we're trying to get a message across to people on how to do things, this isn't doing that, right?
Right.
I don't know what it's doing. And part of it, we talk about how we made a brochure 20 years ago and now we're updating it. I mean, that's not really an action item. I'll also say pesticide advisory. I feel like people, you know, we have public health overload these days, and to call it an advisory, I mean, I don't know what you want to call it, recommendations, something like, but I don't want to go too far, like hyping people up. Yeah, it's good if people can reduce, you know, their use of this on their lawns and things, but I don't know. I don't feel like the supporting document is all that helpful.
We have some additional work to do, but I think the general goal, I would hope, is to just try to inform people about how they can use less. I mean, one of the things that's on town meeting, the town meeting warrant this spring is $360,000 for Walker Pond, in large part because of over pesticide and over fertilizer use and the buildup of nitrogen in a small water body. So there's definitely examples where we would benefit as a community from less use of fertilizers. I think it has to be sort of a position taken in moderation. So if the board's okay, we will try to do a little bit more work on this and revise it and do some additional updating with the goal of providing it for the board either in March or April to take a look at, maybe with the hope of including it in a water bill mailing in the late spring or the early summer.
Yeah, late spring would be ideal if we can get it that soon, only because that's when people are hiring, you know, their lawn care. I mean, they're even doing that now.
Getting started.
Yeah.
Any plans for the spring?
I think like these big block quotes from Phil Landrigan don't really provide that much, I think. And then also it says like, you know, pesticides are registered by the EPA, but they're not tested by EPA. Private pesticide manufacturers do that. Well, so does FDA approved drugs, you know, like that are tested by the manufacturer. So it's not like a unique thing to be pointing out. So, I mean, I you know, obviously it's better not to use this stuff, and we want to get that point out. And I think maybe the Walker Pond, I mean, it's kind of an interesting concept to tie in like a real local example. Anyway.
Yeah, but you know, I know that, you know, when this came up, and it was, I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago. You know, one of the examples that was brought up was that at DeFazio, for instance, they had like a patch of, I forget if it was poison ivy, poison oak, or what have you, that the kids were all going to be like running in. And the only way to get rid of that stuff effectively was to use some type of chemical. And it was thought that the, health and safety of the kids out, by using that chemical outweighed the risks of the chemical. And therefore we used the chemical. And that's why you have that option and why it should remain an option.
Yes. Tara, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to real quick. So the main items that Ally updated that we were trying to get out to the public were the pesticide advisory page. And that was going to be included on a spring reminders brochure in the water bill. So it would include this piece. And we have an updated one that says Needham Health Division and not Board of Health, because I think we had comments that we added in from last time, but we can pull those updated ones in for the next meeting or the next time you want to discuss this topic. And then on the back would be like a Lyme disease tick, educational thing. So we would have a front and back flyer that would go into the water bill. So this would be one that we just want to make sure that's good to go as far as being finalized for the water bill. And then the brochure was the other item in the packet that you have here. That was also the one thing we were gonna promote to the public. Yeah, this one. And again, we had changed the Board of Health to Needham Public Health Division, because I think we talked about that. But if there's any tweaks on this brochure, that was going to be another item we were going to have in the newcomer packets and then in other avenues in town where we would have that. That bolded document you're talking about, Kathleen, I don't think that was one that we're really pushing. It was these two right now that we were looking at pushing out.
Even this pesticide advisory, starting out with learn about the dangers of pesticides. It's like, look, I don't want residents to feel bad if they've got this huge patch of poison ivy that they need to use a chemical to get rid of, all right, for the safety of their family. And now we're going to make everybody feel like, oh my God, I'm between a rock and a hard place. It's like, no, dose makes the poison. We know that.
Definitely some word choices we could improve. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that was tweaked too on the most recent one, but yeah, we'll look at that too and update that.
And looking at what we got here, which is pretty inflammatory.
Was not necessarily to go into sort of wordsmithing this one, was just to sort of bring up the concept, because the residents, Mr. Chair, I haven't necessarily forwarded all the latest emails to you, has been
vocal,
having a lot of people email on their behalf. I think so. My hope, I guess, was to sort of get a reconfirmation of the concept and whether that's sufficient, and then hope to come back next month with a version that we could wordsmith a bit, and say, here's the feedback we got in October, here's the feedback we got, and we think this reflects a moderate approach that encourages what we think is better behavior or better practices. I think that was the hope, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, the brochure's got the information you need and it's a good layout. I think that the pesticide advisory is like just long and I just can't imagine anyone's going to read it. I mean, some will, but it's not the people we're trying to get to pay attention, perhaps, that may choose to read it all. That's all. But yeah,
People's attention span is short, so.
Yes. Just, I mean, I think we're all in agreement with the concept of let's reduce the use wherever possible. I think that the wording of what we have here, however, is just very one-sided and needs to be more balanced.
So we can work on that. I think Ally had already, as Tara alluded, made some edits based on the board's discussion in October. I wanted to just bring it back up to the concept in general. Is it something the board still supports? And if so, we'll give you an updated one with responding to some of the comments already, with some updated language, with some updated citations.
Okay.
That sounds good. And then on this pamphlet, they reference Sustainable Wellesley. And actually, I checked that website, and all the same landscapers that are on there are also on the Green Needham website. So if we can update that with Green Needham, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll bring that back. And last then is the Hungry Coyote
yes.
compliance.
So, Mr. Chair, I brought this back in large part to get a brief update, maybe from Tara and Diana. Let me promote Diana back on the progress. So we did give them a conditional 6-month permit that will run through, Diana can correct me certainly, but I believe the end of July. Right now, they are in good standing. They are still on notice and are subject to increased scrutiny to make sure that they are complying with the areas where they were deficient. I think one of the goals of mine is to come up with a protocol for the department's review, for the board's review, of how we work to have sort of a more established process. I think Christina alluded to it earlier, but the manager of Hungry Coyote said, he didn't understand the memorandum that he was signing. We believe, based on interactions, that he did understand it because it was not just presented in paper form, but it was also discussed verbally. But maybe a best practice is that we provide a translated copy of every material that we hand out, or any material that we require someone to sign. We provide a translated copy. Like that could be an incorporated as a lesson learned and a best practice going forward. I think
either that, or what could even make it easier is basically if you have a single sheet, multiple languages, basically saying that you are signing a legal document, and we will provide a full copy of the translated document upon request. Because that way, if people think people won't get insulted if they actually do understand perfectly good English, but you have given them a warning in their own language that that is absolutely an option for them.
Okay. I think one of the other things that we're potentially thinking about doing, because we find the situation with the Hungry Coyote was very challenging. We'll work with town council and we will try to incorporate legal advice from the Mass Association of Health Boards into that policy. The Mass Association of Health Boards is pretty clear on the authority of public health divisions and boards of health to close establishments for food code violations. I think town council wanted to be very cautious in his approach, and no one really anticipated someone operating in defiance of the closure order. One of the other things we're considering is that previously, and it is perfectly appropriate within the food code, but it might be not our best practice going forward. To have an administrative hearing where we bring people in and sort of say, you're on notice, here's an improvement plan, here's an MOU, we want you to sign this saying you're going to make these commitments to improve. Previously, that's been done where either Tara or myself sort of presides as the hearing officer, for lack of a better word. And it probably is a best practice for us to have that hearing actually be in front of the board. It doesn't have to be by regulation, but it seems like that might be a better practice. All the board meetings are recorded. If someone comes to the board later and says, I didn't understand this, or you confused me or something, it will be a lot harder to do if they've come before the board and said they understand and agree to do something. Yeah, I think the other thing, that we found challenging, that it was a very emotional hearing. I think, a lot of feelings that were involved. We want to sort of, I think, make clear that the way that we, that there are penalties for non-compliance. I'm much less concerned with punishing past behavior than I am about making clear that this incident, while unfortunate, wasn't precedent setting. And that if there is someone who operates in defiance of the closure order, we will go to court that day and get an injunction. If someone operates, once they have the administrative hearing from the Board of Health and the closure order is sustained, or, upheld or suspended, if they operate in defiance of that, we will immediately go to court. I want to sort of maybe make more clear the process we will go through, and the fact that because this person sort of behaved in this way and we maybe didn't have the right guardrails in place to prevent that, doesn't mean that we won't be ready if someone else attempts the same thing in the future. We do have the issue that the board wanted to talk about the fines. Operating in defiance of a closure order, operating in defiance of the Board of Health's order do carry fines. One of the ideas that's been discussed was potentially that if there are, for lack of a better word, if there's good behavior, if there's months of consecutive inspection reports that reveal either no violations or progress towards a more efficient and safe restaurant operation, that the board would potentially choose to forgive those fines or hold those fines in abeyance, rather than necessarily assess them. So that is one thing that the board did want to discuss, on whether the fines to the Hungry Coyote would be assessed, would be held in suspense, would be forgiven, and if so, at what time.
So, my thought was, that the fines would be assessed but held in suspension pending next 6 months of operation and continued compliance, and then achievement of another permit at the end of July. And then if that happens, then we would waive those fines, go from suspension to waived. But if we continue to have problems, we would levy the fines.
What are the fines?
Tara, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Do you know if we ended up with the 5,100 or the 2,500 number?
Yeah, so Diana said it was in the packet as far as how many days they were open. We know that January 9th is when they were closed to clean, but Karen, we saw people going in and out. But January 10th, they were closed, and then we issued the permit on the 13th.
So we believe there was cases where they were open in defiance of an order. Either the public health order, which is issued on the board's behalf, and there are processes that are specified for appeal. You have to receive written warning or written notice that you're being suspended. You have 10 days to appeal. The Board of Health has to schedule a hearing within 3 days of your notice to appeal. But even during that time, it's considered a binding order. So someone operating breaking the rules.
Right, and then continuing to operate after we have held it here. That one I'm less inclined to forgive. First off, the fines are nominal at best. These, it's the same thing when we deal with tobacco sales, right? The fine is the least of their issues. The real hit is that that they can't sell tobacco. In this case, the real hit is they're not open for business, right? So the fact is they were open for business. This is a slap on the wrist if we assess the fines. I also think that by holding the fines, in suspension or potentially forgiving them, again, to your point about setting precedent, sets a very poor precedent.
It does.
And one that is going to, depending on what we put in for guardrails, those guardrails will be challenged because they'll say, look, here's what you did, and you establish these guardrails, and then even after these guardrails were established, here in July, you're giving these fines. You basically let them operate without a permit for a week.
So
I agree with Steve on that. It's a very poor precedent.
So I agree it is a poor precedent. I think to your point, Steve, what really should have happened is we should have been in Dedham District Court, which was closed on January 1st, but on January 2nd at 9:02 in the morning, getting an injunction and having the police physically padlock the premises.
I don't disagree.
So the fact that we didn't, and then they came and challenged the order and then specifically said they wouldn't follow the order and didn't follow the closure order that was sustained by the board, and then eventually came to their senses. I think there's multiple points of failure along the way. And we have to sort of make clear that when we will do this with a better policy and we'll have the board review it and approve it, we will not let someone get to that point. We will have gone through the legal process
Right.
to.
So I think that, look, The stuff after we sustained the order is the one that really bothers me, that they remained open despite that, after we had told them, no, you really do need to close. We completely agree with, with staff and, they were acting in our stead and we agree with it. And you need to shut down. And they stayed open for another 3 days. Okay. That I would not forgive. The ones before that, if you want to argue that, hey, that's a process issue and we should have had better processes and you want to have those in suspension on good behavior, I can live with that. But not with the days after we had, had the hearing and said, no, you need to shut down now. And they defied that.
I concur with Steve.
So what are those fine, like what amount is that?
I think a maximum is going to be something like $300 all told.
Oh, really? Like $100 a day or something?
Correct
We
me if
have
I'm
a
wrong.
double fine fee, right, Tim, on that? If they're found to be open without a valid permit, we have a double food permit fine.
Which is what?
So I
Yeah.
think I'd have to check with Diana exactly what they're up to now. So
But that's sort of a fee, I guess. That's not really a
Yeah.
fine.
a fee, sure, sorry, a fee. So that's not counting the state fine or anything. We're just looking at the local level fee.
To re-inspect, you
Right,
charge
right.
double. I see.
You're
'Cause
finding them open
rushed.
after verifying, that they're supposed to be shut down. We verified that they were open those days after you sustained the order.
Mhm.
So that's just a few $100.
No, I don't think so. It depends on if we use the fines that are specified in the town charter or the fines that are specified in the state food code. I think, Tara, if I did the math right on the state food code, it was $5,100.
Yeah.
It's an escalating thing, like the first day is $100, the second violation is $200, the third violation is $300, up to $500 or something.
And it's
So
5,100 for the entire time from January 1 to the whatever day.
we'll have to
they finally
double check my
reopen?
math, but it was.
Or is it just
was
the
in the
days
thousands.
after the hearing?
No, so I think that's one of the points I worry about, Steve, and I understand your point, but I don't want someone to be able to think that, so the board signs every year, we don't have to technically do it, but we sign
Right,
every year.
that you're our
authorization.
agent, yes.
So technically, we were writing your name on the check, but we wrote your name and it was your word that was saying this needs to be closed. And I don't want people to think that they can dispute that and say, well, we're gonna stay open until the hearing happens, because that is not allowed.
Agreed.
Um,
No, I mean, look, I'd be perfectly fine enforcing the whole thing, again, I think that, you'd have to calculate the town fine, I think is quite nominal. The state fine is not ours. That's for the state. I mean, if we have to collect it on behalf of the state, so be it, we collect it on behalf of the state. But that's up to the state if they're saying that has to be enforced. That's out of our hands.
The fine in the town charter is much more nominal. I think it's $50, $100, maybe capping at 200. So then
Yeah.
I don't know if it even gets to 4 figures. I do wonder and worry, and I don't think this excuses the behavior, but I think in part, the challenges facing restaurants are part of the reason someone was willing to engage in what I think was somewhat reckless, not somewhat, was reckless behavior of operating in defiance of an order. Was they sort of felt like they had nothing to lose and they were facing financial. So I do make some small allowances, I guess, for that. I don't think we should, but I guess thinking about COVID, I feel bad for the challenges facing restaurants. I just don't think that behavior can be allowed. I don't know that assessing a fine right now does all that much except makes the person more desperate and makes them potentially unable to come up with the bill. Which I know can't be our.
As I said, the state's issue is the state's issue. Let him take that up with the state. But if the town's fees are like $50 a day, that's really nominal. I don't think we're causing a huge financial hardship.
So
enforcing
there
our
is,
status.
Tara, you talked to town council about this. So it is the federal food code, but the Board of Health has adopted it as its own.
Correct.
So the levels that are specified would allow the board to do that. There are two different methods. One is criminal and one is not. The higher dollar amount is criminal. And I don't know if that's something we want to get into. Or I'd have some hesitation about going.
I could see foregoing the criminal part right now, going with a lower one, but I think we definitely have to make we're not going to tolerate this. And that some kind of a fine is gonna back that, gonna support that. So I'm in favor of assessing the local fine, but not the state fine.
So, Mr. Chair, I know it's 21 minutes past. Would it be helpful if we came with maybe a document next month that more clearly laid out the differences between the two and the dollar amounts? We can continue the discussion. Or do you have a decision you want to support right now?
I mean, for myself, I think I could support the lower fine for the time that the restaurant operated after the hearing until they got their full permit, and then the fine that would have been levied in between January 1 and when we had the hearing, those days, that could be held in suspension and then forgiven. If others agree with that.
Yeah, I could agree with that also.
I agree with that.
Do they
I like-
also have penalties for the liquor license? That whole process, do we know?
Their liquor license is suspended and is facing potential revocation.
Suspended for a day? I mean, you start.
No, it's been suspended for at least a month
All
already.
along, right? Yeah.
It's suspended indefinitely right now,
Mhm,
pending potentially a revocation.
mhm.
One of the things that was admitted at the hearing by Leona was she sort of said, I haven't been there, I will be there from now on, things will get better, I'll make sure of it. She's the alcohol manager, it's her duty to be, it's her responsibility, and she signed under paying the penalty of perjury that she is on site.
Mhm.
So the select board, when they heard that at our hearing, were very concerned.
Yeah, but the other thing is we may want to coordinate a bit with the select board too, because if we give a slap on the wrist, it's going to be harder for them to revoke the license and vice versa.
Yes, there is the added wrinkle that the town, one of the uses of ARPA money is small business grants.
Mhm.
And to me, one thing that might be a question is if they're a business in good standing, which it depends if they're been assessed a fine or not. Right now, are operating as a restaurant and they're in good standing technically. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the town to give them a grant and then us to fine them. It certainly looks foolish.
No, I mean, you're giving them a break because of COVID, so.
Okay.
I don't know, it's gonna reduce what they get, as a result. So I don't know that necessarily doesn't make sense.
Okay.
But yeah, if we could get some numbers, and if you could explain in those, kind of what the state issue is here.
Okay.
Because I would expect that if the state has fines, that's up to the state to enforce it. Or, does the state enforce it or do we enforce it? And where does that money go? Does it go to the state or does it come to the town?
It would come to the town. There is built into the food code fine levels for violations.
Mhm.
So it's sort of two separate courses that could be.
But you said it was a federal
So it's the
food code,
The federal food code, the
a
state has
state
adopted.
fine.
The federal food code, the state has adopted it, and then the Board of Health adopted that
Mhm.
as its sort of regulation essentially.
Correct.
So there's not a separate fine coming from the state. We assess the fine.
We assess the fine, it is specified at the state level, but is.
So we
have
adopted
Yeah.
the state fine level, is that what you're saying?
Yes, so basically we
I see.
could, there's a route for essentially non-compliance that's in the town charter.
Mhm.
And there's a route for violating this specific regulation and the conditions of this regulation.
Mhm.
And this is a much higher amount and this is criminal.
Mhm.
But I need to get more things in writing from town council before I'm comfortable saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's up to town council if this rises to criminal as opposed to civil. And then we can see what the fine, but if you could lay that out for us at the next meeting, that'd be helpful.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been trying to reach out to town council a couple times on this, just to hopefully get the answer before tonight's meeting, but I wasn't able to, but Tim and I think will be on that for next time around to get that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
In favor? Say aye.
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 Kathleen.
They're good, mic dropped off.
He's
Oh.
gone.
He's out of here.
Ready?
He has adjourned himself.
The Board of Health started at 7:15. So
Oh,
Oh,
no.
okay.
Okay, cool. All right, see you guys.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Bye, thank you.